Raider Nation, what's good? Jesse Merrick here. Welcome to another episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast. On today's show, we're going to dive into a bit of a preview with the final preseason game in Arizona. Will the starters play or not? Plus, I'll tell you which guys I'm watching towards the bottom of the depth chart as those roster cuts are looming on the 26th. That's next Tuesday. Pretty crazy. We're almost there. And we also caught up with a handful of Raiders assistant coaches today as well. We'll be hitting on their thoughts on Jackson Powers-Johnson, Dante Thornton, and Tyree Wilson as well. All right, guys, now before we get it rolling, I got to tell you about our newsletter. If you aren't already subscribed, head to our website, silverandblacksportsnetwork.com, where you can subscribe for free to our Friday edition, which is chock full of Raiders nuggets from the week that was. But if you want even more, you can sign up for our paid version. It's only $6 a month, and that grants you access to our Monday and Wednesday versions of the newsletter as well. That's 3 newsletters dropping Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. It keeps you in the know on all the happenings around your favorite team and is the best way for you guys to support the Silver and Black Sports Network here as well. So please do go check that out. Now, the big question we got to dive into, guys, in the preseason finale on Saturday night in Arizona is whether or not the starters will play. I'll be completely honest, today at practice on Twitter, I had said I didn't think that we were going to see them much. After all, in years past, we haven't. And I know it's a different coaching staff. We've seen a lot of different coaching staffs here in Vegas. But I initially thought, I was like, there's plenty of time before the season, give the guys some rest and everything. And then talk with some of the other media guys, Vinny Bonsignore in particular. He's the man. He was like, I kind of think they're going to play. And we started talking through it. And when you really look at this roster, they're going to be counting on a lot of young guys, and so it's very clear that Pete has wanted to get all those guys a ton of reps and a ton of competition. And I think, look, we did see Ashton Jeanty and what it was he was able to do in that game against the 49ers. So with that being said, I don't know how much we're going to see of, Jeanty and all that. They want to get him going a bit more, I'm sure. But I do think we are going to see Geno in some of the starters. Maybe it's a little more similar to what we saw in the first preseason game, or maybe it does look more like we saw against the 49ers. I'm not really 100% sure on that, to be completely honest, but I do think we see them out there for at least a little bit, because if you think about it, there's 2 weeks until the season starts, so that is a pretty big chunk of time. So I do agree with Vin on that now after kind of talking it through. I think we're going to get a look at more of those guys and just that group as a whole, just to get a little more continuity so it hasn't been 2 weeks, since they did anything, or more than that, actually, if you go back to the game against the 49ers. So get a little burn for them, and we'll dive into a little bit of what we're going to be seeing, particularly from the receivers and why that matters for the starting offense in just a second. But first, I want to go to the running backs and some of the guys that I'm going to be watching. Obviously, anybody that's been watching the preseason has seen what Dylan Lobby has done. He has had a strong camp, both in practice and in the preseason games. He's been doing it in, the actual offensive role that he's had, but then especially on special teams as well. It seems like anytime he makes a big play on offense, and if the offense goes down and scores, he goes and makes a big play on special teams too. So I really like what I've seen from him. I kind of think he ends up being a lock within this running back room. I think he is, more of that scat back type player. And, with talking to some of the assistant coaches today, it's very clear that his skill set fits into this offense and what Chip wants to do. Now, I'm by no means saying he's going to have a big role on this team. I just think he's a guy that if, all of a sudden there were a ton of injuries and stuff, you can throw in there and he can be that scat back type of guy. We've seen him working with the twos more and more. And again, just what he does on special teams for this group, he looks like he has kind of taken that next step in that area of his game. So I think he makes it, and they even said today that, he's been working on his ball, security as well. That was an issue, obviously, last year. We all remember the one carry, boom, and then the rest was history for him. Didn't really see too much of him. So I think he's in a better spot now. Looks like he's shown that improvement. So again, I think Dylan Lobby is safe, which I probably wouldn't have thought going into camp. I'll be completely honest. And the guy that I think isn't safe is Raheem Mostert. Look, I think even with a big day, I don't know, maybe he does need a big day in this one. And obviously, you don't want to hold anything against him with the family stuff. His wife and, him, they had a child, and so he's been there with them. But we just haven't seen a ton from him in camp. And I think it's not really a knock on him, by any means. I think it's more so what we've seen from Zamir. He's looked good. He's still that like big, powerful back, but he seems to have dropped some weight, looks faster, looks quicker, just looks much more comfortable. We've seen some good bursts from him as well. And I think that might be something the staff didn't necessarily think when they signed Mostert, in free agency. So I think Zamir probably turned some of their heads, and he probably comes into the season as the number 2 running back. And I think just given the case of Mostert being an older vet, maybe he doesn't make the roster, which, again, I've said multiple times, he's not that far removed from being a guy that led the league in touchdowns. So I really like the signing when they initially made it. But now as camp has gone on, I'm convinced that he's not going to make the roster, which is, again, surprising because I really liked the skill set that he brought to the table. But who knows? I mean, we'll see if he plays in this last preseason game. If he has a big one, maybe that changes things. I don't know. Like I said, that one has been something that's been tough for me to wrap my head around as camp has gone on, and the way that running back room and the carries have been divvied up in practice. I think that some of the other guys are going to get that opportunity, and in particular, Sincere McCormick or possibly even Chris Collier. I could see both of those guys be guys that get the nod in that the final spots there of that running back room. So I think we would see Genty, obviously Zamir, Dylan Laube, and either Collier or Sincere McCormick. And I do think they like Sincere McCormick better. I think Collier is that bigger type body. He's shown some insane shiftiness. I've seen him freeze some guys in practice a handful of times, and he's obviously very involved on special teams. But Sincere is another guy that does a lot on special teams as well. So I think Sincere probably gets the nod, but man, I've really liked what I've seen out of Chris Collier as well. So that's another guy I can't really count out. But for me, again, had you told me I'd be talking about, Raheem Mostert possibly not making the roster, I would have been a little bit shocked, heading into camp that would be something I'd be saying at this point of the juncture. So keep an eye on that and pay attention to how things are divvied up between those running backs in the preseason game on Saturday. Now, let's hit the wide receiving core here. This is one of the reasons why I do think we still actually see the starters out there. A big reason why I kind of changed my tune on this is because it's very clear at practice that they're still working that deep ball on offense, in particular to Dont'e Thornton. Like, he's a guy they're going to be counting on a lot this season. He's going to be their third receiver when they go to 11 personnel. And obviously, we talked about the frame, the speed, all that stuff that he has. And we saw it flash a lot early on in camp. I would say ever since the 49ers game, something's kind of gone on. Things aren't just quite clicking. I don't really know what to put my finger on like what exactly is going wrong with him. At times, maybe it looks like he's trying to do a little too much or overthinking things. We've seen, a lot of drop passes, so the concentration maybe not quite there. Obviously, Pete Carroll talked about it yesterday that with Geno and him, they're just trying to figure out like where to place the ball. Like, he's so fast, it's maybe not one of those things where you turn and look on the 30 like we saw in the 49ers game. Instead, it's that lofted up over the top and really use his speed, and I think that's something that they are still working on. And we know Geno can throw the ball deep, very accurate deep ball passer, had the highest deep ball passing grade from PFF. So very clearly a part of his game that he can do. We've seen him do it to Trey Tucker. Obviously, we've seen him, throw it deep to Brock as well in so many different ways. So that part of the game is definitely there. It just hasn't really shown up lately with Dont'e Thornton. So I think that's something that they do want to work on. We'll probably see a similar approach like we saw in that 49ers game, because it's very clear that hasn't quite come to fruition yet, so pay attention to that. I see how much Dont'e Thornton actually plays, because it's very clear that they want to see more from him. He's obviously learning how to do a lot more. We talked with Q about it, that Josh Heupel offense in Tennessee, it didn't demand a ton from him as a receiver in terms of the full route tree and all those different things. So he's learning a lot. But with talking to the assistant coaches today, they even mentioned the fact that he's come in with that right mindset, knowing the limitations, that he had in terms of that side of the game from college, and that he's really trying to hone in on a lot of that. And I think once it clicks for him, it's going to be real interesting what he provides to this offense. And again, with him and Trey, like two dudes that have insane speed to be able to take the top off on this defense, that adds a very interesting wrinkle. And again, just his size in general, paired with that, if it clicks for him, would be a real dangerous element to add to this one. Now, let's dive into the bottom of the receiving core here. An interesting deal with how things could shake out there. Tommy Millott, obviously, is the guy that comes in, from the FCS ranks, making the transition from quarterback to receiver. We haven't really seen a whole lot from him. I I expected to see much more than we did. It's very clear he's got the tools. It's very clear that he's got the athleticism, all that stuff. Again, similar to like a Dante Thornton thing, it just hasn't quite clicked. Now, obviously, we've seen Dante make many more plays. That's why he's up there with in 11 personnel with the ones, and that's pretty much where he's been exclusively, So, but with Tommy, obviously, much later round pick, all those different things, and is still very much adjusting and learning. I think it could come down to Tommy Mellott and Colin Johnson. And the reason I'm saying Colin Johnson in there is because he's the only other guy in that room that realistically has a shot to make this roster that brings that size that Dante has. Other than that, it's all a bunch of smaller guys. And I know there's been a lot of talks from some folks that, they think that Tommy Mellott would get scooped up if he was placed on waivers. I just don't know. I mean, obviously there's some people that we're pretty high on and coming out of the draft. That's a really big jump to do that. And I know, okay, if it's like your sixth receiver spot, like whatever, but I don't know. I just don't see another team doing it. I could totally be wrong on this. This could be, an off-base read by me. So I will own up on this one. If they end up keeping him on the roster, then very clearly they thought that he wasn't going to be safe if he went to waivers. Or if they do let him go and he doesn't make it back to the practice squad. Like I could see this one. I can see it. You know what I mean? I get it. I just personally don't think that's the case. I think he is more of that project guy, and I think the Raiders might be able to get him back on the practice squad. The big one for me is just going to be Colin Johnson, but I do think that Bachman makes the squad. I think, again, they keep 6 guys. Alex Bachman has had one hell of a camp. He has been making tons of plays. He very clearly has the right mindset, and I think just seems to fit this offense. When we talked to him, he mentioned, that a lot of these guys in this offense, Chip gives them some freedom to move around, and it's very clear that Alex Bachman has thrived with that freedom. And I know there's an argument to be made about, Bachman being, one of, if not the possibly longest tenured practice squad players in NFL history, that like, okay, you release him, who's going to add him to their active roster? So you think, okay, well, we can do that, and then we throw him on the practice squad, we keep Tommy, and then, God forbid something happens, we elevate Alex Bachman in his place, to actually play when it really matters. And there's a very good chance that could happen. I just think as good of a camp as he has had, you can't risk that, I don't think. I think he would be a dude that if something goes wrong, you need extra bodies in there. I think he'd be able to fit in very seamlessly, again, just with how well he's played throughout camp. It's been something that's impressed all of us, and it's been going on since day one. And anytime anybody new comes to town, one of the first questions they ask is like, hey, who's 81 out there? So I think he makes the squad, which I think would be huge for him. You guys go back and listen to his press conference. It was really deep stuff. It's very clear how tough this process has been for him and how much it would mean to him to make the roster. And I do think he's a guy that could really contribute, for this team if for whatever reason he had to be thrust into action. He's been working with the twos a lot, and at times he's even been mixed in with Geno and the ones when they kind of bring in that like second wave of Jack Besh, Colin Johnson, and Alex Bachman. So he's gotten some work with Geno and them. I think they feel comfortable with him there. Again, it's just going to be a matter of like, how does the roster structure game kind of play out, and do you think you can sneak him on the practice squad? But if I was putting my money on it, I would say I think that Bachman makes it. I think he's had a good enough camp. Now let's talk about the offensive line, okay? It's been the ongoing thing between Jackson Powers-Johnson and Alex Kappa ever since they moved JPJ from center to right guard. We know Kappa's been out with that rib injury for so long. The last couple days at practice, he returned. Yesterday, he was rotating in later in practice with the one, so it's very clear they're still trying to keep that whole battle alive. Having said that, I think it's probably going to be too little, too late for Kappa, and I really don't think that's like the end of the world to have him as your backup. It's very clear that second unit of the offensive line, particularly on the interior at center and both guard spots, they're not ready yet. So having a guy like Kappa to be a depth piece, and I know a depth piece at $11 million a year from a guy like him, probably not the greatest in the world. I know people aren't going to love that, but look, it's a matter of not if, but when you're going to be counting on extra bodies. And to have a guy like him waiting in the wings, you could do much worse than that. So I think that Jackson does end up winning the job. It's just been an interesting case, throughout. And anytime you talk to any of the coaches, Brendan Carroll even mentioned it today when we talked to him with Jackson, they're just looking for that consistency. So apparently he hasn't shown that to them, throughout camp. And one thing that he noted was that he's now played in 3 schemes, Jackson has. And that's tough for a rookie, especially at center. And it sounded like they felt like taking the load off of him that center brings taking that load off of his plate and allowing him to just go and play and be that aggressive physical player that he is at guard is something that's been really good for him. So that was just kind of interesting hearing Brendan talk about that. Again, I don't necessarily take that as a knock on Jackson. I think when you just look at Jordan Meredith, like, again, I've said it so many times, this guy just seems so intelligent anytime you talk to him. So it's very clear that he's out there just analytically, like breaking everything down. And he, multiple times, whenever anybody's talked about him, about Jordan Meredith, they've talked about his communication as a center. He even said it, and we talked about it with Q too, that, the quarterback, Gino, is the president, and the center is the vice president. So he's very vocal. And so I think that's one of the things that they really do like out of Jordan Meredith. And now they're probably, again, just maybe making the game a little easier on Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think we forget is still a young player and could still be very effective as a guard. And I do think he locks down that spot, comes in, and with having less to play for, or less to think about, and more so just go out there and be a physical presence and do his thing that way, I think it's going to work. I think the right side of the offensive line will look pretty good. I think the O-line overall, honestly, will be pretty good. I've said it multiple times that obviously it was terrible last year, but I think the scheme change, the better coaching, all of that stuff is really going to help this group. I don't think we're going to see the same issues that we saw last season where guys are constantly like feasting on the running backs in the backfield as soon as they touch the ball. So, but again, in the preseason game, going to be keeping an eye on the offensive line, how much work Jackson and Alex Kappa get, and kind of what that looks like. But again, the big thing with Jackson is consistency. That's what they want to see. They've been preaching that for quite a while. So we'll see. And maybe he can show that to them as a starter during the season, because I think it'd be wild if he didn't start. And again, my money's on him starting. Let's go talk some safety now. Thomas Harper has been out for a while with an injury. Some interesting stuff going on back there in the second level. For a while, he was a guy that was competing, for that spot up there where Lonnie Johnson Jr. went down with the injury for, to be the first safety off the bench whenever they go to that big nickel look. And he's been out for a while. I'm curious to see if he comes back for the preseason game. If not, that probably does it for him, we'll be completely honest. And that's because a new guy that they brought in, Terrell Edmunds, looks like he's kind of finding his footing. He got even more work with the ones today. We saw it yesterday as well. And he was even getting mixed in at free safety. So, he brings that positional versatility. Again, I've talked about it multiple times. Harper doesn't bring the same size either that Edmunds does, so he fits more of that frame too. And again, the versatility, Pete's talked about the tackling that he also brings to the table. They can move him down, they can walk him up, they feel comfortable about him in the running game and making tackles, things like that. And again, now has shown the versatility at free safety and at strong safety. He's been kind of working a bit of things there. And I think don't read too much into that of is he going to pull him out of his spot? No, that's not the case. I think now what they've been doing is just rotating a lot more guys in here, because Pete has talked about it many times, wanting to see more film on everyone and get the competition going. And I think that was just more so of getting guys in the mix. And so the big thing to watch will be Terrell Edmunds and Chris Smith, who ends up being that first safety off the bench when they do go to that big nickel look. That's an interesting battle, I think, that it'll probably bleed into next week, and for right now, Chris Smith has gotten the bulk of those reps, but it seems like Terrell Edmunds is making his move, so keep an eye on him in the preseason finale as well. Another guy that has been really the talk of the town lately is Tyree Wilson, obviously a very polarizing figure. We talked about it quickly with Q, so we won't dive too deep into this, but man, this guy has just looked different since the 49ers game. Obviously, if you guys go back and watch the tape, you've seen it. We've talked about that yesterday at practice. He played very well, had 4 plays that really stuck out. And team managed to, get in there on a would-be sack. And then later him and Max got in the backfield and blew up a screen pass as well, forced a quick incompletion. And then in one-on-ones, he just kind of took it to Dylan Parham. And Robin Leonard talked about it today. He said not to call out Dylan Parham by any means, is he thought it was just one of those things where Tyree was so on point for those particular reps that it didn't really matter what Parham was going to do. And I think when you move him inside, that does kind of seem to unlock things. We saw it with the NASCAR package when they moved Tyree inside, how much that changed things for him. He can obviously use that length, the big frame that he's got, but when he gets his get off correctly, this is a guy that's so freaky athletic and so strong that if he gets up on you quick, especially as a guard, because things happen so much faster on the interior there, he can really cause some problems. And I think we got a glimpse of that in the game against the 49ers. And again, we in the media got a glimpse of it at practice yesterday as well. So another guy to kind of keep an eye on, see how that development keeps going. And Robin Leonard spoke highly of him. A lot of the guys have recently, and he just seems like a different guy. Robin Leonard said the big thing for him is just trusting in his technique, because that's a guy that has, come in and had to learn a completely different system from what he ran in college, and different looks of how he was lining up and stuff like that. And now is getting used to also moving around the defensive line as well. Versatile piece. But if he turns the corner, that could be a real game changer for this team. Having said that, I do think he's going to be a nice little rotational piece. Just again, don't hold it against him where he was drafted. Totally different staff. It's been a handful of years. Now just look and see what this staff can get out of a guy that, doesn't really matter at this point where he was drafted. I think too much lofty expectations get thrown on guys like that. So just kind of let it play out with this staff, because again, he's totally new to them. They did not draft him. They did not choose to pick him that high, but it seems like he's getting more comfortable. And I talked about this. I tweeted it out. Take it for what it's worth. He just looked so much more comfortable up on the podium as well, talking to us. There's been plenty of times where he's up there and he just looks kind of like meek, and it's a weird, back and forth. Like, he seems very uncomfortable, which I get. Like, public speaking is not for anybody, and I'm not trying to dog the guy one bit. But yesterday, when he was up there on the podium, it was a completely different guy. So comfortable, seemed like he was kind of coming out of his shell more, and I think that was a good sign for him. Again, take it for what you will. A lot of people probably think it doesn't mean anything. I just think it shows a guy that's maybe a little more comfortable in his skin, and maybe that's bleeding over into his game as well. But been impressed with what I've seen from Tyree. If he follows it up with another big game here in this preseason game against the Cardinals, could be real interesting. Maybe more and more people will start talking about him. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today's show. The Raiders are hitting the road for Arizona tomorrow, so no podcast for us. But make sure you tune in after the game. It's going to be real late. 7 o'clock kickoff there. We'll be breaking down what we saw in that preseason finale, and we'll dive into what it means going forward with roster cuts looming. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you are not already subscribed to our newsletter, head to silverandblacksportsnetwork.com and subscribe to get that delivered right to your inbox every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. If you can actually do that for free. So take advantage of the training camp trial offer. It's actually expiring tomorrow on Friday. So get in there, make it happen. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you do subscribe to us wherever you're listening to the podcast. And also hit us with a 5-star review and leave a comment as well. Those things help us so much, help more people get access to the video as well. So please keep them coming. You guys have been awesome throughout this whole journey. We are going to be switching to a different cadence next week as, camp officially comes to a close. Our access at practice, just full disclosure, is going to look a little different, because now we just get a shorter viewing window. We don't get to be out there for the entire practice. And now we start to shift into regular season mode. So again, like I said, we're going to have a different cadence. We're not going to do a podcast after every practice like we have in training camp. During training camp, there's just so much to get to, and we are watching everything, and we're such the inside source there, to give it to you guys. So that's why we were doing that. We wanted to get on a roll with all of this. But now, as the season rolls around, we'll be doing our post-game podcasts, whatever day of the week it is that they happen to play. Obviously, it's going to be mostly on Sundays. So those will be up as soon as possible after the game is done. And then we'll have Tuesday and Thursday shows dropping every week at 11 a.m. So make sure you tune in for those. We're going to have a lot of fun segments for you and have a good time with it all. But the big one next week will be the reaction to the Raiders' final roster. At least it won't be the final roster, but it'll be the first initial roster after roster cuts have been made on Tuesday. That one's going to be fun. We'll get an idea of what this coaching staff views the roster as. You see, how many guys they keep at certain positions and all that stuff. Those things are fascinating to me. I didn't want to do a full deep dive, roster prediction because I suck at math and I didn't want to have to add up to 53, but I like talking about some of the things we did at the top of the show. So make sure you tune in for that on Tuesday. But again, before then, after the game, tune in here for our full breakdown of that. So with that, guys, thanks again for watching and listening, and we will catch you next time on the next episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast.